Hey, Katie, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Would you like to hear a story?
I would love to hear a story.
Okay, so I am not in New York. I haven't been for a while. Yeah, this might like the full story of my quarantine. Maybe arguably interesting, but a story for another day. But the point is, I'm in a more rural area, and one of the ways I've fought the encroachment of insanity, which is very important right now, is to go for long walks. Usually what I do when I go for these walks is I just listen to our podcast, but I cut out your half, so I just listen to myself.
Totally understandable. I would do the same thing.
So I was doing this last week. There's this one walk I do that's about 5.5 miles, and it's a good way to kill time, stay sane. And I'm walking down this one nice scenic road, and I notice something on the side of the road, and I bend down, and someone has driven a tiny little stake into the ground and posted some sort of sign with like a little doggy bag, a plastic bag as lamination. And next to that is what I can only describe as dog shit. So what happened was someone noticed that people weren't picking up their dog shit on this road, and they printed out the part of the town like regulation or statute that says you have to pick up after your dog. And they walked down the road, and every time they found dog shit, they put a little sign next to it like, "Hey man, you broke the law."
Wow.
And yeah, and I have so many questions about this. I If you happen to be the person who did this, please get in touch, because when you think of the personality type of someone who would walk down a road making these like handcrafted little signs with printed out bits of the town code, it's just incredible. It's like the college roommate who would always leave notes about cleaning the sink or the fridge, but times a million. And I'm genuinely impressed at this person's spirit.
I've been trying to create a new meme, which is okay, so we have the Karen. The Karen complains to the manager. I want the Katie to be the person who doesn't complain to the manager, but like directly complains to the person. And so it sounds like what you have on your hands is a real Katie.
This is a passive aggressive Katieism.
It is a little passive aggressive. My style would be more like confronting them to their face, like taking the dog shit, doing a DNA test, tracking down the address of the owner of the dog shit, and then returning the dog shit to their house with a note, of course.
Wow,
Yes.
that's very ambitious. As someone fascinated by human behavior, I have like one of my questions is the person who wasn't picking up after their dog, would this shame them into starting to pick up after their dog, or would just the sheer audacity and aggressiveness of it, if it, like there'd be a backlash effect where they just have their dog shit more? I could almost see that being an
Yeah.
equally likely outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to get down to the bottom of this. You need to stand there on the road and wait and see people who don't pick up their dog shit observe this and then interview them, maybe for the podcast.
I could also like find a source of dog shit and plant it myself and then wait to see who comes out to put a sign down.
It might be easier just to use human shit in a case like this.
And with that, we're like losing our last grasp on civilization, I feel like.
We've been quarantined for too long. Jesse, what podcasts are we recording right now?
We are recording Blocked and Reported, the first podcast.
The first podcast, period.
Yep.
Just the first podcast. Wow. Oh,
Yep.
yes.
We
Okay.
we took this medium, we invented it, and we're gonna run with it.
I like it. I mean, I hope there's some way that we learn to profit off of this great invention that we've come up with here.
If
Next week,
only.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what are we talking about today?
God help us. We are going to talk about the Tara Reade, Joe Biden accusations, and we're gonna get to the bottom of that in the same way I'm gonna get to the bottom of dog shit Ghazi.
All right. So, what else are we talking about?
We're going to talk about a far right provocateur named Candace Owens, who Twitter censored, and also my own personal interactions with her, which were quite unpleasant. Let's start with this whole Joe Biden thing, because I think it seemed like the obvious sort of thing we would talk about, but I know I personally have been procrastinating for a few weeks because it seems like one of those ridiculous stories where you have the combination of something that happened long ago.
Or didn't happen long ago.
Exactly. I apologize. But it's also like the thing where I feel like 80% of the people involved in commentary and reporting on this are on some level a little bit full of shit because it's so clearly politicized and there's such high political stakes that it was one of those stories that just sort of it makes me tired, to be honest. And I know that's the wrong attitude because it obviously matters a great deal if he did what he was accused of. But my initial reaction was just like, how could you? I don't know. It seems like a complicated situation. The dividing line has really been, Biden fans and Sanders fans. Sanders fans gleefully point out, why don't you, if you say you believe women, why don't you believe her? And they, I think, see this as a way of, I don't think most of them actually think Biden is going to actually drop out at this point, though some are calling for that and be replaced by Sanders. But there is a little bit of glee in this idea that like you picked this guy and now look at this horrible thing he was accused of.
And the hypocrisy is extremely obvious. But we should probably get into the details just in case anybody has been, I don't know, in quarantine and hasn't heard about what happened yet.
Yeah. Do you want to? Do you want to take this one?
Okay, so in April of this year, this woman, Tara Reade, who served as a Joe Biden aide in the 1990s, went on a podcast hosted by a woman named Katie Halper, and she accused Biden of pushing her up against a wall in 1993 and essentially like fingering her without her consent. So, like, that's sexual assault. Like, clearly it's an allegation of sexual assault. And at first this didn't get really that much traction. Some like sort of left-leaning media outlets reported it immediately, like The Intercept, and started digging more into the story. But it was sort of ignored by, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post. And more has come out in the past couple weeks. So she claimed in the beginning that she had told a couple of people. Those people have since come out. Some have corroborated her story, some have not. And we got sort of a behind the scenes look at the process of Tara Reade's allegations going from over the past year, in a piece that came out in Vox this week, by Laura McGann, I believe is the reporter's name. And this piece, I really recommend reading it because it turns out that Reade had gone to McGann a year ago, and she alleged that Biden was like sort of handsy with her, and sort of there was like weird power stuff. She didn't accuse him of sexual assault or sexual misconduct, and she was actually really clear about that. She said, like, this is a story of abuse of power, not of sexual misconduct. So it turns out that she shopped this story around to a bunch of different places, so Fox, the New York Times, Washington Post, and none of these outlets ran with the story. And so this was August of 2019, and she's claiming now that they didn't run the story because it was this sort of, I guess, like a sort of media conspiracy in some ways, that they were trying to sort of silence her. But I have a really hard time imagining that reporters who are hungry as shit and want to break stories at any of these outlets would sort of have killed this story because they were like in Joe Biden's pocket. I don't believe that.
No, and McGann said in her Vox piece that she was trying very hard to like confirm this to the point where she could report it, and she got scooped by other outlets. Like
Right.
there's a little bit of conspiracy theorizing going on among some people on the left that people like tried to suppress this, and we'll get into the details. But the fact is, her story has changed, and sometimes it was about sort of sexual harassment and handsiness. Sometimes it was about this, not that that wouldn't be serious, but a much more serious allegation of an all-out sexual assault in the halls of Congress.
Right, right. Yeah, and so now, there's been this rash of think pieces with people like Maureen Dowd, for one, coming out and saying essentially she doesn't believe Joe Biden. She's known Joe Biden for 30 years, and he doesn't seem like the type to do this. And then at the same time, you have like the feminist Kate Mann writing in The Nation, Joe Biden is the type to do this. Whereas, like, there is no type for rape, there is no type for sexual assault or for harassment. Like, everybody's sort of speaking out their ass when it comes to this. But the whole thing has been really fascinating to me because, for one thing, it really shows the limits of Me Too. And I also, and especially the Me Too dictate to hashtag believe women, which I thought was insane from the very beginning and was going to come back and bite Democrats in the ass. And it has. It has many times. Did with Al Franken. Now it is with Joe Biden. But this idea that women, and there's been some debate with, now there's this sort of revisionist history where proponents of Me Too are saying, like people like Alyssa Milano coming out and saying, like, when we said believe women, we didn't really mean like believe women,
Yeah.
but why was that your fucking slogan then? The slogan wasn't like believe women after a thorough investigation. The slogan was believe women.
It's definitely true that some people were saying believe women at the peak of it, just as like a straightforward dictate. But you think that was the general narrative at the time?
From my recollection, it was. I mean, obviously, like there's more nuance and slogans are short and it's pithy and it's there to sort of, I don't know, I guess like slap people in the face. But what these like during this time, one of the narratives that emerged in all of these pieces was this idea that false rape allegations are super uncommon and therefore you should believe women just because false allegations are super uncommon. And that's not actually true. I mean, we really don't have good data on false rape allegate or false assault allegations. I mean, most of the data that we have is says that like between 2 and 8% of claims of sexual assault claims that are investigated by the police are determined to not be true, right?
Right.
And so between 2 and 8% is actually not rare at all. Just like the definition of rare is not like 2% or 8% or whatever. But that also doesn't cover, false allegations or any allegations made in public, made on social media, made to the press. So we really don't have any idea, how common this is or how uncommon this is. But that was the narrative that in these Me Too, these positive Me Too stories kept repeating. False allegations are extremely rare. False allegations are extremely rare. And I think the point of repeating this was to bolster this idea that you should hashtag believe women because women hashtag don't ever lie, which is hashtag bullshit.
Yeah, and well, I mean, so it seems like one of those things where there's an important kernel of truth, which is that for a very long time, women were often, in some contexts, reflexively not believed, and I think it remains really hard to publicly accuse someone of rape, and there's a lot of incentives not to do that. The problem is just when you go too.
But okay, I'm gonna interrupt you real quick here.
Yeah,
There are also incentives to do it. I mean, yes, you can like be put through the ringer. Christine Blasey Ford obviously like got lots of death threats and stuff. It can also be a way of gaining power, of gaining sympathy. There are lots of incentives to make allegations. I mean, right now we're living in a moment where sort of martyrdom and victimhood is this very powerful sort of social force in the world. So I can absolutely see, you know, there are downsides to reporting. There are also upsides to reporting.
yeah, no, I mean, look, it's complicated, and I especially think moving beyond the Reed case, people often ignore the fact that like when you bring this stuff online, and especially in cases where people can make accusations anonymously or where they will quickly get a surge of support, I think it changes the calculus a little bit and maybe increases the possibility and incentives pointing toward false accusations. I guess in Reed's case, it is sort of the straightforward, this thing happened to me. Do I report to the police? Do I tell journalists? And just the fog of time makes it so hard. I feel so pulled in different directions by this because I don't think like the sort of man who would, I get where you're saying that there's not like a type of person who rapes, but I do think the sort of person who would just sexually assault someone in a hallway is that's unlikely to have been the only time they ever did that. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I also, and like one thing in this Vox piece by Laura McGann, she says that Tara Reade was saying, my story never really changed. I just wasn't forthcoming with the details because I was afraid of Joe Biden. Well, what changed? I mean, obviously what changed is that Joe Biden, is now the Democratic nominee for president, but why is she not afraid of him now, but she was a year ago? It just to me it doesn't add up. And I've been trying to sort of reserve judgment on this particular case because like nobody knows. I don't know, you don't know. The only people who really know about this are Joe Biden and Tara Reade, if they even actually know. I mean, human memory is notoriously fallible.
Yeah.
We know from the many many people who've been exonerated from prison after being convicted of crimes including rape and murder, that things like eyewitness accounts, even victims eyewitness accounts, are notoriously fungible. And I'm not saying that she wouldn't like recognize her boss or whatever, but I do also think it's possible, like during the Kavanaugh hearings, my position on Kavanaugh and Blasey Ford was I sort of believe both of them. I believe that she believes that this happened. I believe that he believes that this doesn't happen. And when you have events that happened decades ago, it's very possible that your memories could get sort of conflated and fucked up, and we like this shit just it's not like our memories are not like cameras, they're incredibly easy to change. They're subject to all sorts of influence. So I think that it's kind of a little bit crazy to speculate on what happened because honestly none of us know, even possibly them. That said, there's also the other irony of this case is that Joe Biden in particular has really sort of been on the forefront of ending due process. So in 2011, the Obama administration issued what's now called the Dear Colleague letter. And so in this letter, basically what they mandated was that school universities that receive federal funding had to adhere to these Title IX guidelines that would uh, regulate how universities handle sexual assault. And that has resulted in hundreds of lawsuits against universities by primarily men who were accused of sexual assault and weren't given things like an opportunity to defend themselves. They weren't allowed to confront their accuser. In some cases, they weren't allowed to see the results of the investigation into their conduct. In some cases, they weren't allowed to even know the particular claims against them. And so these men were expelled from school, lost career opportunities, their lives were totally derailed. And so there's now been this like massive rash of lawsuits against these schools, many of which they're actually winning. And Joe Biden was the fucking cheerleader for this policy. And so it took due process totally off the table when it came to universities. And in the legal system, there's a presumption of innocence. That was gone. And so Betsy DeVos just this week, the Trump Secretary of Education, rescinded these Title IX guidelines, and Biden stood up and said, "As president, I will reinstate this." So, like, this is one of the few things that I think the Trump administration has done well was reinstate due process in cases of sexual assault or allegations of sexual assault on campus. And Biden, who now maintains that he's been falsely accused of sexual assault, says that he will take due process back off the table. It just the whole thing is so fucked up.
I find the way people talk about the Title IX stuff, where the federal government gave universities really difficult guidelines, basically saying that they had to follow this standard of 51% likelihood of guilt means you are guilty. I mean, this could be the subject of 10 of our episodes alone. Just you have colleges investigating and figuring out how to discipline kids over what is a crime, and it's been disastrous. And I agree with you. Like, Betsy DeVos is a nightmare in so many ways. To me, this is the only thing she's done that makes some sense, and one of the only good things the Trump administration has done. But the nature of this discourse is, like, you saw people online saying that, schools are now effectively condoning rape
Right,
because the
right,
accused has basic rights, not even as sturdy as they'd have in a criminal context, but that's condoning rape. So you have
right.
it's just sort of off the rails in this weird way. And I think the Biden case has thrown into relief some of the complexities here when you're trying to evaluate cases where it's not like Weinstein, where there's like a lot of named accusers and it's very clear what happened, but there's some fuzziness here. And I don't think it's realistic to set aside sexual assault as this area where evidentiary standards are totally different. Like I hate to say it, but if someone's story changes a lot, sometimes there's explanations for that. Sometimes it has to do with the fallibility of memory. But at a certain point, like, you need to have some way of evaluating the strength of evidence. And you can't have totally different laxer standards for accusations of sexual assault. And it's really difficult and it requires trade offs. But I hope the lesson people learn from this is just this often isn't easy. I remain really unconvinced about what happened here. I don't really see why she would have made this up. I also do think her story changed. I don't think Biden would have just done this once. I don't know how much I should factor in the fact that he is quite handsy around women. I don't think that makes it that he's a rapist, but don't you think if there was like another universe where Biden didn't do any of the handsy stuff, you'd be a little bit less likely to believe the accusation? Or does that not affect it at all for you?
No, I think I mean, I don't think for me it does, but I think for other people it does. I mean, it's sort of like the Woody Allen thing. Like to be frank, I don't think that Woody Allen molested his daughter, but the fact that he married his girlfriend's daughter does, cast out on his character in other ways. And I think the same thing is true with Biden. Even though, like, I was listening to Mike Pesca on the Gist, and Mike was talking about this, and he was saying, Biden for years has credited his success to this sort of like real empathy that he has, and part of his way of expressing empathy is to touch people. And maybe it's not appropriate, maybe it's antiquated, but that is not the same thing as shoving a woman against a wall and putting your hands in her vagina. I mean, these just in terms of like, Kate Mann, who wrote in the Nation that the fact that he like sniffed women's hair and hugs them makes him the type to rape somebody. And it just like I mean, the whole thing, like during Me Too, you know, one of the criticisms of Me Too was that the fear was that people would sort of inflate normal behaviors or slightly inappropriate behaviors to assault, right? And
Right.
supporters of Me Too said, no, 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 we can tell the difference. We know the difference between a bad date and sexual assault. Well, apparently, Kate Mann doesn't seem to really know the difference, because she's saying because the man is guilty of sniffing a woman's hair, he's the type to shove a woman against a wall and rape her, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is it?
I also look, there were aspects of her piece I agreed with, but the theory that like you can chalk up a behavior like rape to quote unquote entitlement, I've always had a problem with that because I think there are many entitled people in the world. There are not a lot of rapists in the world, and
Right.
there's sort of a circular. I wouldn't be making this point if it wasn't such a big part of the discourse, but I really do think it is. You hear male entitlement, white entitlement. It's used as
Power.
yeah, it's used as an explanation for a lot of different kinds of behaviors, and it is circular because if someone commits an act, then almost by definition they felt they were entitled to commit that act. It doesn't like actually explain anything in a useful way. And I think it's very important to figure out why men commit rape if you want to stop it. So,
Right. Yeah, and a lot of this goes back to this to the narrative that rape isn't about sex, it's about power, which was sort of a 1970s feminist argument put forth by this woman Susan Brown Miller that really took hold. I mean, people just sort of it's repeated so often that it's one of these things that people assume is true. But when you talk to people who work with, convicted sex offenders, and you ask them why, or you ask people who have, committed sex crimes, it's if you ask them why they do it, it's generally about sex.
yeah.
It's generally, that's what they say. It's like, "I was horny, I wanted to do it." Not like, "I wanted to, express my power over this woman." It was like, "I wanted to fucking rape this woman because I wanted to have sex."
Yeah, and also just like intuitively if you think about like um frat boys talking about how they getting girls really drunk so their inhibitions will be lowered. I guess from a certain angle you could make that about power, but they want to have sex. That is the point of
Right.
this horrible behavior. And there's certain areas that become sort of like sacred subjects that you don't apply the same logic or rigor to, and where mantras take hold. And it worries me because this is such an important area, and I just think a lot of the conversation about it doesn't really make sense. But the other thing is like the one thing I always go back to whenever sexual assault comes up is I do still think it's really hard for a lot of women to report. It's different if you're like if it's a high profile case or there's other incentives, but it seems like a lot of the time this would be easier if women felt empowered to report it at the time. Like it's very hard to adjudicate these cases years after they allegedly occurred, and I just
Sure.
wish there was some way to make that easier. I actually have personal experience where like I was dating someone who was groped by a cab driver or like an unlicensed cab driver. I always look back at this and try to figure out if I handled it the right way because I did encourage her, and I'm worried if I encouraged her too much to go to the police. And she ended up going to the police and reporting this guy, and it was not a pleasant experience. Like the cops were very stereotypically, or the officer who interviewed her was very stereotypically sort of questioning her behavior and making it more about what she did. And she'd been through this traumatic experience. So I think there's a real trade off in trying to nudge people to report. But, this was a cab driver who was assaulting people, and you want people like that brought to justice. So I think just one area I wish society would get better is make it easier to report this stuff when it happens.
I think it also really in some cases can depend on you live in the particular police department, in your town or whatever. There was a great article in the New Yorker in January by a woman named Elizabeth Flock about a case in Alabama, where a woman was raped. Like, no question, she was raped. There were witnesses, and she killed this guy after he was attacking her, and she was convicted of murder. So there laws vary by state, but in some states women have basically no legal defense, even in a case like that, where like there are people witnessing you being attacked and you kill this guy in self defense and you're the one who ends up jail for the rest of your fucking life, which is deeply fucked up. Like, I don't want to minimize how fucked up the legal system can be. That said, regardless of why Tara Reade decided not to report this to authorities, she also didn't report it apparently to anybody at the time except for her friends. And so, 27 years later, trying to adjudicate this is just kind of an impossible task, especially if you're a person who has been supportive of Me Too and are now in the position of either supporting a candidate who's been accused of sexual assault or supporting a candidate who's been accused of sexual assault or sitting the whole thing out. And in which case, someone who's been accused of sexual assault is going to end up in the White House. So for me, I was skeptical of Me Too from the beginning, not skeptical of all of the claims, but just sort of skeptical that this was going to ultimately lead to sort of a better society. And I'm not sure that it has. I was concerned about the lack of due process in these claims, a lot of which were, sort of made publicly and not in the legal system. So I'm glad that I don't have to tie myself in knots to sort of resign myself to this. It's a difficult position to be in if you were one of the, supporters of the Me Too movement.
I think I'm probably overall less skeptical about Me Too than you are. For me, it's just this is so exacerbating my depression that Biden was the guy. It's just
Yeah.
like I can't believe we're in this position where the Democratic nominee we have to deal with a sexual assault like it's just crazy. I
Do you think that some of the okay, so the a lot of the reporting that has been done on this has been done by like very how do I say Bernie Bros. It's been done by Bernie Bros.
yeah.
So does that make you more skeptical that these claims have come to light now, right after Biden, secures the nomination?
Um yeah, I mean I don't want to fall in that trap of getting nudged too far one way or another,
Right.
evaluating a rape accusation based on politics. It's very clear to me that if you flip this around and like Bernie, God forbid, was accused of something on the same basis of evidence, I think everyone would just flip their positions if they were like a
Right.
Warren or Biden support. It just seems so obvious to me. I know maybe I'm not giving people enough credit, but it's just like the Kavanaugh thing too, where
Right.
I personally thought the balance of evidence was that yeah, she was assaulted. People can disagree, but it was so like people have a lot of trouble understanding their own bias and how our politics affect the way we see the world. It just seems strikingly obvious to me that in the Reade case in particular, where there's a lot of fuzziness, people are just believing what's convenient, and I think that's what exhausts me about it a little. It makes me not even want to like express strong opinions on it because it's very unclear to me what happened. I'm just depressed we're in this situation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I have a fantasy that Biden is going to drop out and he will be replaced by Al Franken.
Oh wow, that would yeah.
Just like Al Franken has never been accused of rape, at least. Whatever he's been accused of, rape was not one of the allegations against him. And I also just think he'd be a great fucking president.
Yeah, or maybe Harvey Weinstein if he can clear up his legal issues.
How about Jeffrey Epstein?
Too soon, Katie.
Too soon. Too soon. Okay, moving on.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about Candace Owens, who will always have a place in my heart for reasons I'll explain. Owens is, people yell at me when I call her far right. I think by any reasonable standard, she's far right. She's a online personality who has become wildly successful in part because conservatives really like African Americans who talk about how African Americans shouldn't be Democrats. She fits that niche. Her book is called, I'm going to try to read this without crying or laughing. Blackout: How Black American Can Make Its Second Escape from the Democrat Plantation.
Oh, wow. Quite the imagery
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So, clearly implying that Democrats are basically enslaving Black Americans. Candace Owens has been just slinging coronavirus conspiracy theory bullshit. She claimed that like liberal states were overstating their death totals for some sort of financial reason, which is, I mean, think about what an accusation that is to say like New York is claiming people who are dead who aren't dead. But she got involved with this controversy in Michigan. The Democratic governor Whitmer there is under fire for her restrictions. So Candace Owens tweeted last week. Apparently, at Gov Whitmer, that's Whitmer's handle, believes she is a duly elected dictator of a socialist country. The people of Michigan need to stand up to her. Open your businesses, go to work. The police think she's crazy too. They are not going to arrest 10 million people for going to work. So she's basically calling for like this sort of uprising, not like an armed uprising, but go to work, ignore the government orders, which would of course be very dangerous, I think, and infect a lot of people. Twitter suspended her for this. That immediately launched her into the status of a martyr among a lot of conservative people. Then they brought her back. Then they censored the tweet. So I ended up writing about this in my newsletter this week. I'll link to it, and I'm curious to get your stance on this. I'm actually not that. I don't get that upset when Twitter makes certain decisions about regulating content. Like, I think it's complicated. You need to really weigh different values, competing priorities. I don't think Twitter needs to just let anything fly. I do think when it comes to people calling for others to defy the government, Twitter and Facebook, every platform should actually go a lot lighter on that. I just think there's something unique and important about allowing people to say, I want you to defy the government. That's important and deserves protection. And I think that it deserves protection even when the speaker is someone who is certifiably crazy like Candace Owens. Does that strike you as insane?
No, not at all. But I do have a question for you. So Facebook, was deleting or censoring. They were shutting down event pages for these like rallies in these like anti quarantine rallies, and because of it was a public health issue. So do you think that like that also should be protected, even if it's this idea that it's a public health issue, people are going to be spreading the virus?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really tough trade-off. I think the idea of Facebook shutting down people's attempts to organize politically on what is a mainstream debate, I just think you can't do that. And I'm torn because like it's a dangerous gathering, but people have already decided to try to gather. And obviously I wouldn't feel that way if you're talking about like a Nazi gathering. I think Facebook should I'm fine with them censoring like far, far out there, but what does it do if like people actually disagree about this and want to organize politically about it? I don't like anything that just says like the government needs to be treated as infallible. We need to squelch debate about its decisions because tomorrow, maybe there'll be some other controversy about like Islamic terrorism or something, and people like us will disagree with the government and want to tell people not to follow their rules. I don't like this idea of these big unaccountable tech companies being in bed with the government, even in situations like this where I agree with their politics.
Right. I mean, that's the problem with all of these attempts to, or one of the problems with all of these attempts to censor online. First of all, like you said, you turn the censored party into a martyr. There's a Streisand effect, whereas probably not that many people would have seen Candace Owens' tweet, and then she gets banned, and now everybody has seen Candace Owens' tweet. So it doesn't, from just a pragmatic perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But then I think the bigger issue is that if these rules are applied consistently, and they are not applied consistently by tech companies, but if they were applied consistently, then you should also shut down Antifa rallies or whatever. You should shut down these like far left attempts to organize against the government. Which as much as I disagree with Antifa, I still don't think that that their ability to organize should be limited by tech companies. I mean, and you know. I think we should also point out that this is not a first. It might be a free speech issue, but it's not a First Amendment issue. These companies are well within their rights to operate however they'd like, and if that means kicking every Candace Owens off of Twitter, or every Milo off of Facebook, or every Alex Jones off of YouTube, they're well within their rights to do it. But they have so much power that I'm totally concerned about this creeping censorship. And we have seen this, like Megan Murphy being banned from Twitter for tweeting "men are not women" or whatever. Trans people being kicked off of Twitter for misgendering themselves,
Yeah.
which has happened. I don't think it's pragmatic. I think it's a disturbing trend, but also like they are well within their rights to operate however they want.
Yeah, yeah. It drives me crazy when people try to make this a First Amendment issue just because people are so ignorant about the nature of the First Amendment. But it also drives me crazy. Like, I'm not accusing you of this because you're doing the opposite. But you can't just say, "Well, it's not a First Amendment issue, so I'm not going to express any opinion about what they do. They can do whatever they want." There's a real hunger for censorship in our corner of the world, like among liberal journalists. That I think I mentioned this the last episode, but there was this feud between Steven Crowder, like a right wing comedian on the and Carlos Maza, this socialist commentator, used to work for Vox, and liberal journalists seem to really be lining up and racing to say that this guy Crowder should have been demonetized or banned from YouTube for saying things like calling Maza a lispy little queer, I think he called him, and stuff on that level, which is definitely mean, but you can say that in a Comedy Central roast on basic cable.
Right, and Mata is also a public figure, like, if you put yourself in the position of becoming a public figure, you need to expect that people are gonna make fun of you. You know, he's not, like, choosing some, like, high school kid and bullying him. Maza has put himself out
It
there.
was, I gotta say, like, look, I really like, the show Reply All, but Reply All and a lot of other outlets I like, we're treating this like it was some like helpless 10-year-old getting bullied on a playground rather than a guy who i- makes a lot of money doing what he does and happens also to come from like a super wealthy background. So I think that wasn't out yet. But it's just this weird, I don't understand how people don't think it through. Like, okay, if we're saying YouTube, you can be banned for saying stuff on YouTube that would fly on basic cable. If that was applied consistently, what would YouTube look like in a month or two? I guess maybe it's that if you're a liberal journalist, you know that YouTube is going to side with you. They're not going to actually apply the rules
It
consistently.
becomes this like wholly partisan thing where for a lot of people, especially in the media, your allegiance is sort of determined by the parties involved. So you like Carlos Maza, so therefore YouTube should, censor Steven Crowder. You don't like Candace Owens, so therefore, Twitter should censor Candace Owens. And the truth is, like, tech companies do have a liberal bias, which is also fine. These are privately owned companies; they're allowed to have a liberal bias, but they do have so much power right now that they really have become the sort of town square. And I don't know. I would like them to see. I would like to see them apply these rules evenly when they're going to apply these rules, but they don't, and they're not obligated to.
No, and I also just think like I think I'm saying this point. Glenn Greenwald was on the fifth column. I think I'm stealing this point from him, but it's like, okay, YouTube and other platforms are announcing like basically if you deviate from WHO guidelines, in some cases that kind of speech should be you can be regulated or censored, but the WHO has been wrong about stuff all the time. And the idea that you can just pick, okay, at this moment, whatever the WHO says goes, that's pretty dangerous. In the same way it's dangerous to say whatever the government is calling for right now. You can't even argue otherwise. So I think I just resent being in a position where I have to defend Candace Owens, who's just like one of the worst media figures around.
I like that about you, though. I mean, I think that that's one of the problems with the media right now is too many people are not willing to defend bad people if the principle needs to be defended because you end up sort of defending these odious people who you don't like, and so people refuse to do it. So we need more defense of bad people.
I will defend any bad person who needs me to defend them.
Well, you're on the right podcast for that. So I want to hear your Candace Owens story.
I was into Candace Owens before she was big, you could say. I
You're an early adopter of Candace Owens.
Candace Owens is from Connecticut. She was involved in some local media store where she was bullied by I think a kid who was riding in a car with the child of a local town official. It was just one of those local blowups involving school bullying. From this, she developed what she said was an interest in halting bullying online. So in 2016, she launched Social Autopsy, which very much based on its vague Kickstarter campaign, came across as a site where anyone could accuse anyone of bullying, and then they would be listed in a database as a bullier.
That sounds like a great idea. You know who would love this? I think Carlos Massa would have loved this site.
Exactly. Yeah, he would have been a big fan. I'd love to get his thoughts on it. Carlos, you should
Yeah,
come on the show.
yeah.
Um,
You should unblock us first and then come on the show.
Yeah, he blocked me. Well, this is a story for another day. Actually, I think we committed early on the podcast. No stories about getting blocked, but we'll talk about Carlos more.
Yeah, this is a story for Block Party. Yeah.
Exactly. Block party. Love to have you on. Um, okay, so she launched Social Autopsy. It was called. There was the thing that happens where online outrages, where like there was initially some silence, then a few people found out about it. They got mad. It reached Reddit. It reached 4chan. Candace Owens got like a horrible wave of online harassment, including a lot of racist harassment, because everyone thought this was such a bad idea. It was just like an engine for doxing and harassing people and falsely accusing them of being bullies. It was just in every conceivable way the most tone deaf bad idea. And she got genuinely harassed about it.
As she deserved.
Yeah, exactly. We are pro bullying and harassment here on Blocked and Reported. Um, I was at New York Magazine at the time and I wrote a story. I got in touch with her. I wanted to find out what had happened because she was starting to sort of melt down a little bit online. She was starting to, it's easy to say this in retrospect, but her tweets back then came across as actually pretty Trumpy. Like, everyone is against me. There's a conspiracy. Everything's so unfair. I got in touch with her and I told this story of how this woman who didn't know anything about the internet wandered into this hornet's nest and became radicalized into believing there was this conspiracy against her. And I'll just post a link to the story because I don't want to go into all the details. It has to do with Gamergate and gaming, but just the level of ignorance on her part, where she was like, so doxing is a common term in online discourse. It means posting someone's private information, connecting their online identity to their real life identity. She didn't even know what doxing was. So she, in from her point of view, suddenly she's like, "Huh, everyone's using this term doxing. This must be a conspiracy because why else would they be using the term doxing?" Which is, if you know anything about this stuff, is nonsensical. Anyway, I write this piece, and she um, really didn't like it. So the result of this was she had various higher ups at New York Magazine pinged with emails for this change.org petition called New York Magazine's Jesse Single Commits Fraud. Article in question should be recalled. It just launched one of, like, at the time, one of the worst online blowups I'd experienced, where suddenly this big corner of the internet was just not just like going after me in a fuck you way, but trying to start rumors about me. Someone, like, basically all these online trolls realized that they could manipulate Owens and just get like retweeting or saying whatever they wanted. So one of them literally tweeted at her that I had some dark, horrible incident from college.
Mm.
Yeah, imply it
Gonna have
very
to get
much
to the bottom of that.
exactly. And she instantly retweeted it. And so I had never been through this before. And I freaked out to the point where I like had a meeting with higher ups at New York Magazine, just being like, "This is getting really crazy," and I'm like, I'm almost approaching the point of considering legal options because it's so far beyond criticizing the article. There's so much sort of what struck me at the time as libelous stuff going on. So yeah, it was my first introduction to like truly insane online pylons, like with this extra element of trying to destroy someone's reputation. And it's, I mean, as you're aware, it's not fun to be at the bottom of that. And I think if you told me in 2016 that this was just like the start of how weird online stuff was going to get, I never would have believed you. And I also never would have believed that like the stuff I got from the left would have ended up being way worse than the stuff I got from the far right. But you live and you learn.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the interesting things about this. Like, I read your piece about Candace Owens, and in the piece, so it was sort of about also about Gamergate, and in the piece, you seemed kind of skeptical that like feminists could be involved in bullying, which I think by now you've probably realized is like feminists, lefties, feminists, whoever. This is not a partisan issue. Everybody can be involved in bullying except for us. We are not bullies.
No, we're not bullies.
And the other thing about this is like Candace Owens is a really good example of how when you feel attacked by your own side, how it can have this radicalizing effect where you feel shunned, you feel like a pariah, and so for some people they end up sort of jumping into the arms of the other political tribe because there's like we live in this system where it feels like there's two options, which is obviously not true because that's about political parties, not about sort of social networks or whatever. But Candace Owen is a great example of that, which I think is really a shame. I think it's a shame that she went from like someone who seems to like have genuinely cared about this issue to someone who not only like engages in bullying herself, but also has turned into basically like a fucking Trump supporter. Um, but
She got to meet Kanye though.
Oh, well, worth it, worth it. That's right,
Yeah.
Kanye came out as a Candace Owens fan, I forgot about that. There's a lot of discourse about, like, how, YouTube can radicalize young men into turning into Nazis and stuff like that. Well, it's also true that when you get attacked by people who you consider your ideological allies, it can have the exact same effect where you just feel like you have to like find some sort of support elsewhere, and that support tends to be, like among the far right in her case, at least.
Yeah, it's someone needs to write like the definitive rise of Candace Owens piece. It's really interesting. I think she got latched onto by Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, which is just this like goonish right wing effort. I think the right is much better at like nurturing talent and giving them money. The fact that someone this create like she's not normal. There's something off there, and the fact that she has quickly risen to the stature of like a conservative superstar tells you something about the movement. I just don't like look, Carlos Maza is a dick, but he's not on the just like disturbed, detached from reality level as like a Candace Owens. I just think they've got a whole different thing going on over there, but maybe I'm being unfair.
Well, I also think that her race probably has something to do with, the level of which she's been embraced by the political right, because, identity politics is incredibly powerful. And if you have someone who is black saying, Democrats are the party of slavery or whatever, that has a lot more resonance than somebody who's white saying it, even if she is equally unhinged and incorrect about it. It's sort of, she becomes this sort of useful idiot.
Oh, conservatives love black commentators and pundits who can say the stuff they wish they could say. That this has been a thing for a long time. And
And I mean, liberals do too. I mean, I think this
yes.
goes both ways. And you know what? Like, as much as I hate identity politics, I also like will totally acknowledge that there are things that I can say because I'm a woman, because I'm a lesbian, that I absolutely could not say if I were a man. So identity politics works for me in some way as well.
Well, like all the anti-Semitic slurs you use against me, if you weren't a lesbian, you couldn't get away with that.
No, if I can say that because I'm an honorary Jew.
That's true. Herzog.
Okay. Anything else we should milk out of the Candace Owens story?
No, I just feel like I've done listeners a terrible disservice by introducing them to Candace Owens, so I'd like to apologize for that.
Jesse, so did you have the first like big like national piece on Candace Owens
Yeah, weirdly enough,
and
her and
ContraPoints?
ContraPoints. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
you created both, and they both fucking hate you now. Look at that.
I think with ContraPoints it's a little bit more complicated, but yeah, for a
Hmm.
while at least she hated me. But you know what? When you're like me, when you're a trendsetter, when you're ahead of the curve,
You're an influencer.
I think it's literally just back when I wrote about both of them, I was so much more online than I am even now that I could like notice stuff before other people did. But I think these days, like the market for writing about online bullshit is much more crowded.
Yeah, yeah. It's too bad you got pushed out by your own creation.
I just have such like a just talking about Biden and the Tara Reade thing just made me so tired. I'm gonna sleep the entire week until we next record. Okay.
All right. Well, hopefully nothing will happen in the next week.
Um. Okay. So definitely keep rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. We are blocked and reported podcast at gmail.com, the bar pod on Twitter. Anything else we should?
We have a Reddit. There's we have a Reddit page now.
Oh yeah, a few days ago we did a few days ago yesterday. God, coronavirus is just
Yesterday.
destroying time. Katie and I did an Ask Me Anything on Reddit. So if you go to reddit.com/r/blocked and reported, this is our subreddit. It is closing in on 100 members, so it's
It's huge. We're
huge.
almost up there with Chapo Trap House's subreddit, I'm sure, or Blocked
They
Party.
Thank you to Soft and Chewy, which is such a good username for creating the subreddit.
There's there's something, like, vaguely obscene about that.
Oh, it's disgusting, but it's also wonderful.
I don't know why, but yes, it's disgusting.
Yeah, I think that's it, Katie. Are you ready to call it?
I'm ready to call it. I'm ready to block it.
This has been Blocked and Reported. I'm Jesse Single, and remember, believe all women sometimes, depending on the situation and the political scene.
And I'm Katie Herzog. And also remember, if you're walking along Jesse's street and you see a bunch of little piles of shit, it probably belongs to him.